My name is Stanley Alfred Moore. My profession now is an attorney at law, but I'm a retired Justice of Appeal in Botswana and Swaziland, those two African countries, where I was a Justice of Appeal in their highest countries for some 11 years. 9 years in Botswana, 5 years in Swaziland. Incidentally, Swaziland is now called Eswatini, and it's a kingdom, a traditional kingdom where His Majesty, I think, has some 13 wives. But his father before him had 80 odd wives. So there's still a culture of multi marriage. I was about 6 years old at St. James the Less Anglican School, where there was a concert featuring the animals. And my role was that of Pussycat. And I remember being dressed in the costume and all that. And I can't really remember what it is I had to do. All that I do remember is that at the time when it was finished, the applause broke out. And then some children ran behind me to pull this pussycat tail before I could get downstairs to the lower flat to undress. So that was the first time I was really in the theater, if you might call it that. Then when there were school concerts, I was in the concert. And I was a member of the church choir, St. James the Less Church Choir, St. James the Less Anglican. And finally, I was a member of the Woodside Choir, which is a mixed choir under Reggie McDavid. And that is where I met my first wife, Solita Cynthia Carmenia Mackenzie, to whom I was married for 12 years. And she's the mother of my first two children, Susan Allison and Adrian Stanley. So that marriage lasted for 12 years, and it ended in divorce. But I never divorced my children, and I had a close relationship with them until now. Now, in high school, we used to be looking to the future, and some students would aspire to become A or B, and I aspired to becoming a lawyer. And but before I became a lawyer, I was an officer of customs and excise. But before I became an officer of customs and excise, I was a primary school teacher. But in those days, one had to go to England to become a lawyer. And for a number of reasons, I could not go to England before I did. One of the reasons I believe is I didn't want to leave my mother, who was a single parent for nearly all her life, or married life. My dad, I last saw when I was about 2.5 years old. So the way to go was to study locally as an external student of London University. And this is where some of my greatest mentors came in. Rex Herbert McKay, ORSC, LLB, and Sir Joachim Gonzalez Sobola. They were already barristers, but I think they were now completing their LLB. You could do that sort of thing then. Now you have to have an LLB before you become an attorney. And so they inspired me and encouraged me to study as an external student. And one day I heard that there was a class which was being held by Mr. Fred Wills, as he then was. He was a Guyana scholar, bright, and I think he, of all the tutors that I've had, I would rate Fred Wills as the greatest of them all. Fred Wills had a class which used to meet on Sunday mornings at the home of the Edwards family in Norton Street. It would meet from about 9 o'clock in the morning to about 1. And within that period, he would cover several subjects because the students were at different levels. When I joined the class, there were many students who were very far advanced. But in the classes, we spoke and exchanged views and discussed points. And at one time, I felt I was so far behind that I thought of dropping out. But two people talked me out of doing that. Fred Wills himself, who said to me, "You have all the correct legal instincts." And Desiree Bernard, who became Chancellor of the Judiciary, said, "Stanley, look, I don't think you should do that. Let me give you my notes." So I copied her notes. And the rest, as they say, is history. Another story which I think I should tell you, which is true. In 1961, I was entered for the LLB Part 2, but I was then employed by Booker's Shipping Demerara Limited, having been awarded a Booker cadetship in 1960. And Booker Shipping Demerara Limited wanted me to do a course in shipbroking. So I put down the judicial studies, the legal studies, and was concentrating on shipbroking. But about 2 weeks before the first paper of the LLB was due to start, I met Joseph Bull, as we called him then, at Bonnie Alfage's repair shop at the corner of St. John Road and Bar Street, Kitty. And we just chatting. "Well, how your preparation for the exam is coming on?" I say, "Well, you know, I'm not writing the exam anymore." He said, "But why?" So I told him about the shipbroking and so on. He said, "But did you enter for the exam?" I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "Why not write it? You have nothing to lose." So I did write it. And 3 months later, or thereabout, I got a call about 10 o'clock one morning from Mohammed Ayub Ali Makdoum, my very dear friend who's passed away. "Stanley, the LLB results are out. British Guyana's got 2 classes, myself and yourself." I couldn't believe it. But when I became an examiner, looking at scripts, I then understood how I could pass, and a lot of students who knew a lot more law when you came out of the exam, the spouting law, left, right, and center, didn't. The mistake they made many correct statements of law in their papers, but which had nothing to do with the question. But the gift which I had was to be able to understand what the question was about, the issue raised in the question, and to put down what little you knew about the issue, and then move. My papers were never long, my answers. But it seems to me that what the examiners were looking for, and that's how I managed to pass. I often wonder what my life would have been if I didn't follow his advice. Then he was the person who admitted me to the bar in Guyana. And he was the person who, as the retired Chief Justice of the Bahamas and the retired President of the Court of Appeal of the Bahamas, heard that I was retiring from the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court in the British Virgin Islands, said to me, "Stanley, there's a vacancy in the Bahamas. Are you interested?" I said, yes, I was interested. And he advised me how to pursue the application. The result is that on the day that I was proceeding on pre-retirement leave from the British Virgin Islands, on that very day, I was being sworn in as a judge of the Bahamas. And having spent 2.5 years in the Bahamas and reached the retirement age, I was extended for another 6 months in the Bahamas. And then having retired as a judge, I spent most of another year in the Bahamas doing a large inquiry. Incidentally, I've done inquiries in Bermuda and in the Bahamas and several in Guyana here. Either as a sole inquirer or as a chairman of inquiries. So, having finished my high court career, I'm now in retirement. And the Commonwealth Caribbean the Commonwealth Caribbean Educational Institute, let me get that right, Commonwealth Caribbean Educational Institute, of which I had become a fellow, again through the help of one of my mentors, Sir Dennis Byron, who was, at the time when he did that, was the Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. They were holding a meeting in St. Lucia. I'm now a retiree. So I said, well, let me go to the meeting. I was not a part of the official program. I didn't deliver a speech or present a paper. I just had some conversations. But at that meeting, there was 3 persons from the Republic of South Africa who had attended that meeting. Johan Kriegler, who was a former member of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, which is that country's highest court. Fritz Brandt, who was a member of the second highest court in South Africa, and Cecile van Riet, who was the chief of the Justice College. You'll wonder how I'm pronouncing those names the way I am. That's because my mother was a Surinamer who spreek Hollands. Daarom ik spreek een kleine beetje Hollands. So, to my surprise, before these people left St. Lucia, they invited me to come to South Africa, all expenses paid, to have a kind of lecture tour or series of visits, if you want to call it that, and have some conversations with the judges and the educators, all expenses paid. And I'd have to say that they treated me extremely well. But what I believe Johan Kriegler had done was to arrange for me to see 2 people. The first, from the time we met, no chemistry, this is not going anywhere. The second, on the other hand, from the time we met, it's like if we knew each other for all of our lives. He was a cricket broadcaster of test matches in South Africa. I was a broadcaster of test match cricket in Guyana, and so on. The next thing that happened, I met him in Johannesburg. Sorry, I met him in Cape Town. He invited the Chief Justice of Botswana to come to Johannesburg to interview me in Johannesburg. And the next thing that happened is that I was appointed a judge of the Court of Appeal of Botswana. And I think you would have one of the pictures of me being sworn in. I believe I was the first person ever to be appointed to the Court of Appeal of Botswana who was not a previous Court of Appeal judge. Up to that point, all of their Court of Appeal judges were retired Court of Appeal judges from other places, including there was one place always for a judge of the British House of Lords who was a Scottish House of Lords member. So that's how I got there. They normally gave contracts for 2 years. I spent 9 years in Botswana. Largely, I believe, because of Pat Tebot, who was the president of the Court of Appeal of Botswana with whom I developed a very close relationship personally. I mean, the judges who were all foreigners at that stage, stayed at the same hotel, and we had dinner every night at the same time together. But after dinner, and the others had gone up to bed, Pat Tebbutt would invite me now into a lounge, and we'd have a sip of brandy and a little further conversation. There's another member who joined that group, Lord Sutherland, I think is his name, from Scotland. But every time he poured the brandy for us, he made sure that each glass had the same amount. But I say that to say this, that the way strangers who have never met before have come into my life and helped me. And then while at Botswana, as a Court of Appeal judge in Botswana, Michael Ramudibedi, who is from Lesotho, but who was then the Chief Justice of Swaziland, which is now known as Eswatini, met me in Botswana. And the next thing that happened is I was appointed as a judge of the Supreme Court, which is their highest court, in Swaziland, now Eswatini, where I spent 5 years as an appeal court judge. And in both cases, in Botswana and in Swaziland, one of the reasons for my contracts not being renewed was that they had now gone into a change of policy of no longer having 100% foreigners as in their highest courts. They now had begun to introduce locals. In the case of Swaziland, it was a constitutional provision that after a certain date has been reached, it was only nationals who now could be court judges at all levels. So that's how my career in Africa came to an end. And then having nothing to do and enjoying the so-called benefits of retirement board, Rex comes up to Florida to see his doctors. Of course, he and I get together and meet. Well, Stanley, why don't you come back home? So Stanley came back home. And that was the beginning of my second career as an advocate in the chambers of McKay and Moore, which started about 2016, about what we are now in 2022. And I would say that again, even at this stage, the training and the help which I got from mentors is benefiting me till now. I forgot one important mentor, Sir Lionel Adfrel Loku. I first met Sir Lionel in England when he was the Guyana High Commissioner in England. I was then a student. He treated me as if I was royalty. Anytime I went to the High Commission for anything, he would take it over from the officer concerned and deal with it himself. Then when he came back to Guyana, he had me as his junior in several cases, and I have the honor of being his junior in 3 of the many murder cases which gave him a world record. We were appearing for 3 persons charged with murder in Essequibo. And I say that to say this. Well, I could tell you the truth. There came a time when I was Minister of Home Affairs. And there came a time when I ceased to be Minister of Home Affairs. And it is a fact that when people hold offices of that kind, and for whatever reason they no longer hold those offices, it is sometimes a very shattering experience. So Sir Lionel invited me to his chambers next door, knelt down on the floor, put his hand on my head and prayed for me. Mind you, let me say this, I'm digressing a bit. Mr. Burnham also played a great role in my life. We were the same village kitty, because When my parents came from Berbice, they were married in Berbice. My father's a Berbician. My mother lived in Kitty, was next door to the Burnhams, who lived at the corner of Stanley Place and Pike Street. So Burnham knew. In fact, they used to call, Kitty people used to call themselves Kittyphonians. And so sometimes during the political days, I was discussing this matter with my fellow Kittyphonian, Stanley. So he was very kind to me and helped me to get my studentship and all those things. So he believed, I think with some justification, that any time that he asked me to do something, I should. And so he asked me to become Minister of Home Affairs. He used to call my home every night, well, not every night, but many nights 11:30. Hello, Stanley, where are you now? Come over and see me right away. And sometimes I would be there talking to him alone until 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes. So on this night, when he said to me, I'm appointing you Minister of Home Affairs. Thank you, comrade leader. But, io momento, at that same moment, I made a mental preparation for the moment which was bound to come in some way or form when I would be no longer Minister of Home Affairs. So that the cabinet was too big, that is clear. And so he put out a statement. This body is being redeployed, this body is being reassigned, and so on. And it ended with, and Comrade Stanley Moore, at his own request, is leaving the cabinet, and so on and so on. Those words, at his own request, came back to help me later on, not to haunt me. Because my wife, Cheryl Lynette, Gwyneth Leanna Moore, let me fast forward, became a Liat pilot, and she was appointed in Antigua and based in Antigua. And in the way that wives communicate to their husbands, you don't get an order or anything like that. You soon realize what the request is, which you wish to make sure that you grant the request. And it is in that kind of process that I ended up applying for a job in Montserrat. Having been an acting judge in Guyana in 1979, I am applying in Montserrat in 1990 for a job which was just one step above the entry level. And my friend Harold Brody Smith bothers, but Stanley, that's a very junior position. I mean, but my wife wanted me to be near to her. I couldn't get a job in Antigua. The president of the Bar Association was very candid with me. Stanley, how are we going to allow you to get a work permit and go and work in the private practice and take away work from our boys? The only way you could get a job in those countries is with the government, because the people who, they're natives, who are qualified for those jobs, work for far more outside of government. So, let me come back to this point. When my application went in Montserrat, everybody's, well, why is a man of this qualification and experience and with a CV like this applying for such a low position in Montserrat? And this was because the previous incumbent of that office, who was an Englishman, fell out with the local people in the local government, and he resigned under the pressure of the discord which had ensued between him and the government. And the then acting Chief Justice from Barbados, they're having looked through my papers fully. Well, the only thing that I can think of really might be the circumstances under which he ceased to be a Home Affairs Minister in Guyana. And then I showed them released by Mr. Burnham's official and Stanley Moore at his own request. So that came back to help me. And so I became the principal Crown Counsel of Montserrat. But again, the kind of things that happen in my life, you often wonder. The Attorney General then was another Guyanese, Odell Adams. Excellent lawyer. But he'd been Attorney General for 6 years and he sort of bored and he wanted to get out. By the time I got there, he had a lot of accumulated leave, which he was taking. And so much of the time, he was not there. And much of that time, I was acting as Attorney General. Then he became promoted and became a judge. And so after 6 months, with several acting upon, I became the Attorney General of Montserrat. The governor of Montserrat then turned out to be also a former Booker cadet. Bookers, as you know, had businesses in England and all over the place. So we had a lot in common. We were born in the same month, in July, if those things mean anything. But he and I had an excellent relationship. It used to be said that I used to run the country. But if he gave me an order and an instruction, my wife wasn't there, I dropped everything else and did it. The police, the security people informed him that the Attorney General's car used to be at his office, at its office, from about midnight every night till morning, which is a fact. I'm living alone. I go to bed, I wake up about 11:30, I shower, shave, and I go to work for the next day. And he would ask me to do something which he expects an answer in about 3 days or 4 days, and you get an answer next morning. From part of my training at Booker's as a negotiator between employer and employee, I was able to solve 2 serious problems. Again, when I told him of the second one, that the people have settled the dispute, he couldn't believe it. But again, another thing which I can't explain. One Sunday morning, I am traveling from Montserrat to Barbados. My wife, meanwhile, has been removed from Antigua and now based in Barbados. So between Antigua and Montserrat, it's a 10-minute flight. 90 minutes from home to home, but now she's gone further away. The flight from Barbados to Antigua is an hour and 20 minutes. So I stopped in at St. Lucia as a stop. And for the first time ever, a member of the staff of LIAT is going to ask me very politely, Mr. Moore, would you come with me, please? A lady's name by Mrs., I forget now. And if you have any baggage could you bring that with you as well? So she escorts me off the plane, past the customs, past the immigration, as if I was some sort of royalty, into the LIAT office. And while I'm in the LIAT office, well, Mr. Moore, you have anything that you need to put in the fridge? Would you like some tea? And here's the telephone. If you need to call anybody, feel free to use the telephone. Well, it didn't come to me immediately I knew anybody in St. Lucia. But then I was reminded that one of my former law students from Guyana, I was a lecturer in law in Guyana for several years at the University of Guyana. Indra Hariprasad Charles was the personal assistant to the Chief Justice in St. Lucia. So this is about 10 o'clock, a Sunday morning. So I called her. Mr. Moore, where are you? Where are you calling from? Listen, the Chief Justice wants to see you right away. Look, here's his numbers. Call him right away. So I called the Chief Justice right away. Mr. Moore, I'm going to be appointing you as a judge to go to the British Virgin Islands from the 15th of May. This is about 2 weeks after I'm speaking to him now. So then I go back to Montserrat. I'm telling the good news to the governor. But how can they do this? How can they just yank my Attorney General away from me like this? How can this be done? And after about 5 minutes, that's out of board. He said, but Stanley, really, I should congratulate you. So the matter didn't end there. He left Montserrat, went to St. Lucia, spoke to the Chief Justice, communicated with the Foreign Comment Office in London, who appointed a special judge to go to the British Virgin Islands to take up the position that I would be taking. And the short of it is that I was not appointed a judge for another 6 months, so that my governor did not have to suffer the fate of his Attorney General being yanked away from me. But you know, all good things happen. My assistant as Attorney General turned out to be another guy, another law student of mine. She is now a judge of the Court of Appeal of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, Gerthel Urani Thom. When she applied, and we looked at her application, it didn't have a reference from one of the referees. And somebody pointed this out to me, the governor. I said, well, I don't need the reference. I know her. I taught her, so on. She was appointed. Eventually, she had a high post in Antigua, then became a judge of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, then a judge of the Court of Appeal of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. So that's how that story played out. But my going to Grenada in 1992 was a blessing in disguise, because in Grenada I had a sort of tuition, if you like, to enable me to handle the sort of conditions which I met in the British Virgin Islands. If I'd gone straight to the British Virgin Islands, it would have had a very sophisticated kind of thing. Lots of commercial cases with international lawyers and all coming out. I may have found myself in much difficulty. But when I went there in 1996, incidentally, by then the British Virgin Islands people had been calling, oh, when are you sending Judge Moore? And I had 4 nice years in the BVI. And when I was retiring, there's a retirement dinner and all that sort of thing. And so that's that career. Now, 2 important things happened while as a judge at the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. Judge Sir Dennis Byron became my Chief Justice around about 1996. He was a revolutionary in modernizing and advancing the court. In those days, it's not like now where everybody had an email account. Some judges said they didn't want to have anything to do with that. But he persuaded some, including myself, to get an email account and so on, and to modernize. I was a member of the Judicial, what you call, Educational Institute of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, which was improving and modernizing the court system, the procedures and so on, the rules. And he and I became very close until now. Another thing happened in 1996. The present president of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Justice Adrian Saunders, came into the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court system as a High Court judge. But quickly, you could tell this person is superior intellect, and so the knowledge, the training, the experience that I was able to get from those 2 gentlemen was a great value to me, an asset to me when I became a Justice of Appeal in Africa. And I'm happy to say that even when I was a judge in Africa, you could call them or write them and get an opinion and so on. Incidentally, for all the years I've been away, I could contact McKay and Moore and get some assistance from Rex McKay. So that is how I came to be where I am now. And I can't stop singing the praises and giving thanks for the people who have helped me all along the way. This may be relevant, but I'll say it nonetheless. The first time I met my wife, I was a lecturer at the University of Guyana in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Law, as a lecturer in law. She was a member of the support staff in that department. So she had some association with law and that sort of thing. And from then till now, she has been the most important person in my life. In my illness, which I'm coping with, she's my primary caregiver. Women have an extra sensory perception which men don't have. I mean, I'm going to say something which some gentlemen may be a little bit uncomfortable. I think if one gender is superior to the other, one sex, women are superior to men. Look at what's happening now in Guyana with the courts. And Guyana is not peculiar. In Guyana now you have more female judges. The two highest judges in Guyana are women. And both at the level of the High Court, as well as in the level of the Magistrates Court, as well as in the level of the Court of Appeal. You got 2-to-1 women to men. So I have benefited greatly from my wife's, what I would call, extrasensory perception. And she's been the head of the family. I've told that publicly. You can print that if you need to. And she's a financial controller. And that's why my life is so easy and comfortable. So, there we are.
I'm curious to know if, over the years, you've kept a tally of the number of cases that you've dealt with.
Well, unfortunately, I have not conducted a tally. But what I could tell you is this, that very few cases which I did were appealed against. Some, of course, were appealed against. And 6 of the cases which I did as a High Court judge reached the Privy Council. In 2 of those cases, the Court of Appeal upheld me and agreed with me, and the Privy Council upheld both the Court of Appeal and me. In 4 of those cases, the Court of Appeal had overturned my findings before the matter went to the Privy Council. And in all 4 of those cases, the Privy Council restored my findings and overturned the findings of the Court of Appeal. That is a fact. And one of the cases, Talanga Stiftung, I think it was, the parties were both German. And Lord Hailsham from the Privy Council wrote the judgment. He said some very kind things about the judge and his ability and his talent and his dealing with a difficult case and all that. So I showed the judgment from the Privy Council to my then President of the Court of Appeal of Botswana, who is also South African. And when he read it, he said, "Stanley, if Lenny has written this about you, the judgment must be really good." So I would say that those facts speak for themselves. And but the most important thing a judge needs to do is to identify the issues, encourage the parties to focus their attention on the issues. This is the Commonwealth to the Bahamas in the Supreme Court of the Northern Region. This is a copy of the special court sitting, and you will see what the judges, the lawyers there said about me when I was leaving. I mean, there's nothing to gain. And I feel proud as a Guyanese personally. And I also feel proud of what they said about the other Guyanese as well. My children are some of my greatest motivators because they expect much from their father. And I have to do my best to make sure that I live up to their expectations.